The mask does not move. Inside it, something breathes. Slow, shallow, controlled. Fingers curl, but do not feel the cold metal they touch. Blood runs, yet pain never arrives. A crown presses down on a skull already breaking apart. Someone screams a name. Someone else drops to their knees. The torchlight flickers, and for a moment the shadow on the wall looks wrong. Too thin. Too still. The man beneath the mask does not flinch. Steel clashes nearby. Hooves thunder past stone. Orders are shouted, then repeated, then ignored. Because the figure standing, there should not still be standing. The hand lifts. Not strong. Not steady. But absolute. Silence spreads outward like a stain. No one dares look beneath the mask. No one asks how much is left inside the armor. No one asks what it costs to keep him alive. The body has already begun to fail. The flesh is retreating. The nerves are dying. Yet the king remains. Breathing. Commanding. Watching. A living man walking through his own death. And as the torches burn lower, one question lingers, unspoken, unbearable. How long can a king rule after his body has already surrendered? The late 12th century was an age balanced on a blade. The kingdom of Jerusalem stood as a fragile outpost, Latin, Christian, foreign, surrounded by powers that did not forget, did not forgive, and did not retreat. Every road carried danger. Every treaty was temporary. Every sunrise could bring war. To the south and east, Muslim forces gathered strength under leaders who understood patience better than fury. Saladin was rising, not as a reckless conqueror, but as a strategist, unifying fractured lands with discipline and resolve. He watched Jerusalem not as a prize to seize, but as a certainty waiting to be fulfilled. Inside the city walls, fear wore many faces. There was fear of siege, fear of betrayal, fear of starvation. But above all, there was fear of time. The kingdom had been carved out by crusade, sustained by faith and steel, but faith did not train armies and steel rusted quickly in the desert air. Power depended on leadership, on presence, on a king who could ride, command, and intimidate. Jerusalem was not just a city, it was a symbol. Whoever ruled it claimed divine favor and invited endless war. Every decision made within its halls echoed across the region. A wrong word could trigger invasion. A weak ruler could invite annihilation. And weakness was the one thing Jerusalem could not afford. Its nobles were divided, alliances were brittle, rival factions whispered behind stone walls, waiting for moments to exploit. Succession was never secure, loyalty was never guaranteed. The kingdom needed certainty. It needed a king who could be seen, who could stand before soldiers and enemies alike and appear unbreakable. Because in this world, perception was survival. And yet, behind the walls of Jerusalem, behind ceremonial armor and guarded chambers, something irreversible had already begun. A disease without mercy, a decay without pain, a slow erasure of the body. The threat was not only outside the walls. It was wearing the crown. Baldwin was trained as a prince, not as a survivor. From childhood, his days were structured by ritual and discipline. Lessons in Latin and scripture at dawn, sword drills under the sun, horsemanship until muscle and instinct became inseparable. He learned how to command before he learned how to question, how to sit still while others argued, how to let silence force obedience, how to rule without raising his voice. The court taught him restraint. The battlefield demanded resolve. But something about him unsettled his instructors. During training, Baldwin did not react like the others. When struck during practice, he did not wince. When cut, he did not curse. Pain seemed distant, irrelevant. At first, they praised it as discipline. Then they realized it was absence. His body was failing in ways no one wanted to name. Leprosy did not announce itself with drama. It crept, numbness in the hands, pale marks on the skin, a weakness that could not be trained away. In an age where disease was interpreted as judgment, this was more than illness. It was a threat to legitimacy. A king marked by decay risked being seen as cursed. So the rules became stricter. The court controlled who could see him. Armor became thicker. Clothing became layered. And eventually, the mask appeared. Silvered, expressionless, regal. The king who could not feel his own flesh learned to rely on will alone. Daily life became a test of endurance. Servants helped him dress. Knights helped him mount his horse. Physicians whispered lies wrapped in hope. Yet Baldwin ruled. He attended councils even when his hands trembled. He rode at the head of armies even when his body protested. He faced enemies who believed him already dying and proved them wrong. Emotionally, he became distant, not cruel, not cold. Focused. Every day was borrowed time. Every command might be the last. And that knowledge sharpened him. But it also isolated him. Because no one could follow a man into a future he could not physically reach. The warnings did not arrive as alarms. They came as absences. At first, it was small things no one wanted to notice. A council session delayed without explanation. A messenger returning without having seen the king. Orders delivered in writing instead of spoken aloud. In a court built on ritual and visibility, these breaks in routine carried weight, but no one dared name it. Baldwin was still present, but only in form. When he appeared, the armor was heavier. The mask stayed fastened longer. The pauses between movements stretched just a little too far. A servant would hand him a goblet, and his fingers would close around it seconds late, as if the command to move had taken a longer path through his body. Physicians began requesting private audiences more frequently. They left pale. Treatments changed weekly. Oils replaced powders. Bandages replaced salves. None of it reversed what was happening. The numbness spread. The weakness deepened. Parts of the king no longer responded at all. And yet he did not complain. That silence frightened them more than pain ever could. Guards stationed outside his chambers noticed strange patterns. Baldwin would stand for long stretches without moving, facing windows long after daylight had faded. Candles burned down completely while he remained upright, motionless, as if frozen in thought, or waiting for sensation that never came. Sometimes when spoken to, he did not respond immediately. Not confusion. Not deafness. Delay. As though the words had to travel farther than before to reach him. In training yards, knights whispered. In corridors, servants avoided eye contact. Rumors circulated carefully, passed from mouth to ear without ever being said aloud. They said the disease had reached places it should not. They said the mask hid more than scars. They said there were moments when Baldwin could not feel his own heartbeat. No one confirmed it, because confirmation would demand action. And action would demand admitting weakness at the very center of the kingdom. Military signs followed. Scouts reported enemy movements earlier than expected. Patrols returned without engagement, describing an unnatural quiet along the roads. Fires burned in distant hills, then vanished before dawn. Signals were missed. Responses arrived late. Not failure. Hesitation. Commanders noticed Baldwin giving fewer direct orders. Authority flowed through intermediaries now, trusted men repeating his words, interpreting his intent. But even they struggled. Sometimes the king would approve a plan, then revise it hours later without acknowledging the change. Sometimes he would issue a command and stare forward afterward, unmoving, as if unsure whether it had been spoken aloud. His presence still commanded obedience, but certainty was beginning to erode. The mask became symbolic in a way no one expected. It was no longer just protection or dignity. It was distance. No one could read his face. No one could see strain or fear. No one could tell how much awareness remained behind the metal. That uncertainty spread outward like a slow infection. Soldiers still saluted, nobles still bowed, but questions formed behind their eyes. How much longer? How much is left? And what happens when there is nothing left at all? The most unsettling sign came quietly. One evening, a physician dropped a metal instrument while examining the king's hand. It clattered loudly across stone. Baldwin did not react. No flinch. No turn of the head. No tightening of the fingers. Only when the physician spoke did the king finally look down, studying his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. The room went still. Nothing was said, because everyone understood what they had just seen. The body was receding, but the crown remained. And as the days passed, the kingdom moved forward on a fragile illusion that the man behind the mask was still fully there. No one knew how close that illusion was to breaking. They only knew that when it did, there would be no warning left to ignore. The day did not announce itself as different. Dawn arrived pale and unremarkable, spreading slowly over stone and sand. Armor was fastened, banners were raised, horses stamped and snorted as they always did. The routine held tight, familiar, reassuring. Baldwin appeared exactly as expected. Masked, armored, upright. The silver face reflected the morning light without expression, without age. To those watching from a distance, he looked unchanged, still the king who had ridden before them so many times, still the figure they had learned to trust simply because he was there. Yet those closest to him noticed the difference immediately. Mounting his horse took longer, not dramatically longer, just enough to register. His grip on the reins was fixed, almost rigid, as though his hands had forgotten how to adjust once closed. When the horse shifted beneath him, Baldwin's body followed a fraction too late. No one spoke. The signal horn sounded. The army began to move. The noise built gradually, hooves striking earth, metal shifting against metal, the low murmur of men preparing themselves. Commands passed down the line, repeated and echoed, spreading outward from the center where the king rode. Baldwin remained at the front. Visible, intentional. As long as he could be seen, order held. The first contact never came. Instead, there was distance, space, a stretch of land that felt oddly empty. Scouts had reported movement, yet nothing emerged. No charge, no clash, just waiting. Time slowed. Dust hung in the air, unmoving. Horses grew restless. Soldiers adjusted their grips, scanning the horizon for a signal that did not arrive. At the center of it all, Baldwin sat motionless. Too motionless. A messenger approached, riding carefully, stopping several paces short. He bowed, spoke, waited. No response. He spoke again, louder this time. Still nothing. The messenger hesitated, glanced toward the commanders, then edged closer. Baldwin's masked face remained forward, unchanging. The reins were held tight, unmoved. The horse beneath him shifted uneasily. Another messenger arrived, then another. Whispers rippled outward. The commanders exchanged looks, measured, controlled, but uneasy. And then it happened. Baldwin raised his arm. The motion was slow, deliberate, unmistakable. The signal to halt. The horns echoed it immediately. Lines stopped. Movement froze. An army that had been preparing for chaos fell into absolute stillness. Silence spread. Not the calm silence of discipline, but the strained quiet of uncertainty. The king's arm remained raised longer than necessary. longer than it ever had before. No further command followed. Seconds passed, then more. A breeze moved through the banners. Somewhere, a horse stamped sharply against the ground. Metal creaked as men shifted their weight. Baldwin did not move. Finally, the arm lowered. But instead of another signal, advance, retreat, regroup, there was nothing. The king's posture changed subtly, not collapsing, not slumping. Emptying. Those closest to him would later struggle to describe it. They would say it was as if something inside the armor had gone quiet, as if the figure before them was suddenly lighter than it should have been. A commander stepped forward, calling out. No answer. Another moved closer, hand raised, not in command but in caution. And then the horse lurched. Not violently, just enough to break the stillness. When it did, the figure atop it shifted, and something fell. The mask struck the ground with a dull, metallic sound. It rolled once, then stopped. Every eye fixed on it. No one moved. The armor remained upright in the saddle for a heartbeat longer, balanced by habit, by structure, by something that had been holding it in place until that moment. Then it tilted. Slowly, almost gently, and slipped sideways. The saddle creaked as the weight left it. The armor hit the ground with a hollow sound, metal striking earth, echoing louder than any shout. But there was no body inside. No blood. No sign of struggle. No broken straps or torn fastenings. Just armor. Empty. For several seconds, no one reacted. The army did not move. It was as though everyone was waiting for someone else to decide what they were seeing. A knight dismounted first, stepping forward cautiously as if approaching something sacred or forbidden. He knelt, touched the armor, pulled it slightly. Nothing. Another followed, then another. They lifted pieces away carefully, expecting resistance, weight, something human beneath the steel. There was nothing. The horse stood nearby, reins hanging loose, breathing steadily. It had not bolted. It had not panicked. It waited. Confusion spread faster than fear. Questions formed but had nowhere to go. Had the king fallen earlier? Had he been removed? Had anyone seen him leave? No one could answer. Those further back only saw motion around the fallen armor. Whispers reached them incomplete, distorted. The king. The mask. There's nothing. Commanders rushed forward, issuing sharp orders to contain the moment. Lines were tightened. Men were turned away. The field was sealed. But the damage was already done. Something irreversible had occurred in full view of an army. And no one understood how. As the mask lay in the dust, reflecting the sky, one realization settled over those present. Quiet, heavy, undeniable. Whatever had been holding King Baldwin IV upright until that moment was gone, and nothing had replaced it. The response was immediate and inadequate. Orders snapped across the field within seconds of the discovery. Horns sounded again, not for battle but for containment. Units were locked in place. Riders were dispatched in widening circles. No one was permitted to leave. No one was allowed to approach the fallen armor without permission. What had just happened could not be allowed to spread unchecked. Commanders moved with forced certainty, issuing instructions they did not fully understand themselves. The field was treated like a crime scene before anyone had language for such a thing. Tracks were examined. Ground disturbed by hooves was studied closely. Tents were searched. Supply wagons were opened. Every man who had been within sight of the king was questioned. Again and again. The questions never changed. Where were you standing? What did you see? Who moved first? The answers never aligned. Some swore Baldwin had been rigid long before the halt signal. Others insisted he moved moments before the mask fell. A few claimed they heard something, metal shifting, breath escaping, just before everything went silent. No two accounts matched perfectly. The armor itself was examined in private. Physicians were summoned not to treat but to explain the impossible. They inspected clasps and fastenings, expecting signs of removal. There were none. The straps had not been cut. The seals were intact. The armor had not been opened on the field. It had simply been empty. No blood stained the padding. No fragments of flesh clung to the interior. No marks suggested collapse or extraction. The mask was worse. Its inner surface bore faint traces of wear, scratches, condensation marks, proof that it had been worn recently, but nothing else. No indication of sudden removal, no sign it had been torn away. It was as though whatever had been inside had left without resistance. Or without mass. The king's chambers were searched next. Servants were pulled from their duties and isolated. Guards were relieved and questioned separately. Schedules were reconstructed down to the smallest detail: who had entered, who had exited, who had been alone with the king in the days leading up to the incident. Again, nothing solid. Records from the physicians' quarters were requested. Some were missing. Others appeared altered, dates overwritten, notes vague where precision had once existed. Treatments were referenced without description. Symptoms were listed without progression. It was as if the documentation had been deliberately softened. Commanders demanded clarity. They received silence. Official reports were drafted quickly, then rewritten. Language was debated. Phrases were removed. Certainty was replaced with implication. The word disappearance never appeared. Instead, terms like withdrawal, illness, temporary absence were used. The army was informed that the king had been removed for medical reasons. Morale was cited. Stability was emphasized. No mention was made of the empty armor. Within days, messengers carried carefully controlled versions of the story to Jerusalem. The court received them in sealed chambers. Doors were closed. Councils were held behind thick stone walls. What was said inside never reached the streets intact. Some nobles demanded to see the body. There was none to present. Others insisted the king still lived, that he had been moved secretly to protect him from enemies and from panic, that he would return when ready. No one could disprove it. And so the search continued quietly. Riders combed routes leading away from the field. Monasteries were questioned. Villages were inspected under pretense. No sign of Baldwin emerged. Not alive. Not dead. Weeks passed. Then months. Gradually, the investigation lost urgency, not because it was solved, but because it was unsolvable. Without evidence, without consensus, without a body, the truth became a liability. Something had gone wrong at the center of the kingdom, and no one could explain how. So the records were closed. Witnesses were reassigned or dismissed. Physicians stopped speaking of the final days altogether. And the armor was locked away unseen. Officially, King Baldwin IV faded from public life due to illness. Unofficially, the question lingered in every guarded silence. How does a king disappear in full view of his own army and leave nothing behind but steel? The investigation ended without answers, but the uncertainty it created never did. When certainty failed, speculation filled the void. With no body, no confession, and no unified account, the disappearance of King Baldwin IV became a space into which theories quietly poured. None were ever acknowledged officially. None were entirely dismissed. Each survived because it explained one part of the mystery, while leaving another unresolved. The first theory was the most acceptable: that Baldwin died naturally, and the truth was concealed. According to this version, the king's body finally reached its limit. The disease progressed faster than expected. He collapsed during the campaign, and his death was immediately hidden to prevent panic and political collapse. The empty armor, they argued, was a carefully staged moment, his removal conducted quickly, deliberately, and in silence. But this theory fractured under scrutiny. Too many people were watching. Too many hands were nearby. Too little evidence remained. No one could explain how a body was removed from sealed armor without witnesses. No one could account for the complete absence of blood, fabric, or weight. And no record, public or private, ever documented the handling of a corpse. For a medieval kingdom obsessed with burial rites and sacred remains, that absence was deafening. The second theory was whispered, never written. That Baldwin did not die, he was withdrawn. Proponents believed the king was alive after the incident, removed secretly by a small inner circle. His condition, they claimed, had become too severe to manage publicly. The mask could no longer protect the illusion, so the illusion was retired instead. This theory suggested Baldwin ruled in name only afterward. His authority carried forward while his physical presence was erased. It pointed to unexplained decisions issued in his name, to regents acting with unusual confidence, to court physicians suddenly disappearing from records. But it raised a fatal question. If Baldwin lived, where did he go? No monastery recorded his arrival. No sanctuary reported sheltering him. No letters surfaced, and no one ever claimed to have seen him again, not even in rumor. For a king whose image had once been everything, he vanished too completely. The third theory was darker and more difficult to dismiss. That the body failed before the man did. This explanation did not rely on conspiracy or secrecy, but on biology pushed beyond understanding. Baldwin's disease had erased sensation, strength, and control. What remained, some argued, was will alone, habit and posture sustaining an image long after the body itself was functionally gone. According to this theory, the armor was not concealing a healthy man or even a dying one, but a body already in irreversible collapse, held upright by supports, routine, and expectation. When that final halt occurred, when movement ceased, there was simply nothing left to support. Yet even this explanation faltered. A body does not vanish. Collapse leaves evidence. Death leaves traces. And none were found. The final theory never appeared in chronicles. It survived only in silence. That the truth was deliberately erased. That whatever happened was so destabilizing, politically, spiritually, symbolically, that it could not be allowed to exist in history. A king ruling without a functioning body threatened ideas of divine favor, legitimacy, and order. If Baldwin had become something that could not be explained, then explanation itself became dangerous. So records were altered. Witnesses were reassigned. The story was simplified. Leper king, brave ruler died young. Clean, contained, acceptable. But history has a way of preserving questions when it destroys answers. Because no theory accounts for everything. Not the empty armor. Not the sealed mask. Not the total disappearance. And so Baldwin IV remains suspended between versions of his own ending, neither fully alive nor properly dead. A king whose greatest mystery is not how he ruled, but how he was allowed to vanish at all. In the end, history chose quiet. King Baldwin IV did not fall in a blaze of glory, nor did he vanish in a storm of recorded events. He simply faded, his final moments smoothed over by careful words and missing pages. What remained was a version of the story that felt complete enough to accept and vague enough not to question. He became a title. The Leper King. A brave ruler, a tragic figure, a young monarch taken too soon by illness. That version is safe. It asks nothing of us. But the details left behind, the empty armor, the altered records, the silence of those who were closest, suggest something more unsettling. They hint at a truth that could not be spoken in a world where kings ruled by divine right and strength was equated with moral authority. Perhaps Baldwin ruled longer than his body allowed. Perhaps the mask preserved more than dignity, it preserved order. Perhaps the kingdom needed the image of a king more than the man himself. And when that image finally failed, the truth became dangerous. So it was buried, not beneath stone or ceremony, but beneath agreement. Agreement not to ask, not to look too closely, not to challenge the version of events that allowed the kingdom to move on. Yet questions endure. How much of Baldwin IV was still alive at the end? When did the king truly disappear? And if power can outlive the body that holds it, what else in history has survived only because no one dared to remove the mask? Speech balloon, what do you believe really happened to King Baldwin IV? Was he hidden, erased, or something else entirely? Share your theory in the comments and decide for yourself where the truth ends and the silence begins.